Okay, in the interest of time, we will get started. So let me just begin by saying hello and thanking all of you for joining us today. As we get started, if you would like, we ask that you introduce yourself in the chat by sharing your name, your pronouns, and your program area, just so that everyone who has joined can get to know who else is in the room. So on behalf of the Office of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Accessibility, I'd like to welcome you all to our Learn Over Lunch presentation. My name is Karen Sessions, and my pronouns are she, her, and I work within the Office of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Accessibility as the SOGI officer, which stands for Sexual Orientation, Gender Identity, and Expression. And I'm so excited to welcome Keegan Miller to our presentation today, who is the Director of Public Training for the Trevor Project. And they will present on Trevor's Ally Training. And this presentation is actually our agency's second offering. The first offering of this exact training was offered to us back in April of this year. I would also like to take a moment to introduce Audrey Reyna and Julie Miller from the ASLI Interpreting Solutions, and they will be signing for us during this presentation. So thank you both. This presentation is really important because it helps all of us build an understanding and our cultural sensitivity about the challenges faced by individuals who identify as part of the LGBTQIA+ community. This presentation is also very timely because November 13th through November 19th marks Transgender Awareness Week, and November 20th is recognized as Transgender Day of Remembrance. So in a few moments, please check out a link that we will make available in the chat. This link will bring you to our OCFS intranet site, where you can review supportive resources and information about these days of recognition. And given the challenging legal and political climate that we face, it is so important that we bring attention and focus on how we can best support individuals who are LGBTQ plus identified. And this continues to be a heightened priority for our office as well as for the agency. So again, thank you all for being here and taking the time to learn and be exposed to this information. So again, it is my pleasure to introduce Keegan Miller to our Learn Over Lunch space. And at this time, I pass the mic to you, Keegan.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. Good morning. It is so good to be with you for our ally training today. What the next hour will look like together. We will talk a little bit about Trevor Services, our mission, and how we complete that mission. We will talk through LGBTQ language considerations, both some terminology, as well as things like gender neutral language and pronouns and other important ways that we can make sure we're addressing the community appropriately. We'll talk through intersectionality and bias and how that impacts LGBTQ youth mental health and well-being. And finally, we'll end with resources and time for question and answer at the end. Now, just because there's question and answer at the end doesn't mean you have to hold those questions. By all means, if you have a question throughout the session, you can feel free to drop that in the chat, and I will address those as they come up. Some other things to keep in mind, this is just the beginning. We should continue these conversations outside of this space. The way I like to think of it is what's said here stays here, but what's learned here leaves here. I also want to recognize that people have different levels of experience and knowledge about today's topics. So for some folks, this might be brand new material, and for other folks, this is a refresher course. Wherever you are on your journey, you are welcome in this space. And then finally, I just ask that you keep an open mind, be non-judgmental about the materials, about ourselves, about each other. Just really treat this as a learning and growing environment for all. So the Trevor Project is the leading suicide prevention and crisis intervention organization for LGBTQ young people. Our mission is to end LGBTQ youth suicide, but our real goal is to help every LGBTQ young person see a bright future for themselves. It's really about creating hope, right? And that's what we're really trying to do. So we do that work in two ways. First, through our intervention programs. So our crisis lifeline, chat, and text. You can see on the screen there the variety of ways that folks can reach out to us, whether it's calling that number 866-488-7386, texting START to 678-678, or going to our website, thetrevorproject.org. And then there's a giant help button up in the upper right-hand corner. You can't miss it, and folks can click on that. I really like to highlight our website version because there is a quick escape button as well. So when someone's engaged in a chat via our website and say they're not out to their friends or family, someone comes in the room, they can click 3 times, our site goes down, and I think it goes to a regular Google page if I'm not mistaken. And so it's a really great way for folks to get the resources and support that they need while maintaining their privacy. Now, all of our services are available 24/7, 365 days a year. And when someone reaches out to us, they're met with our trained crisis counselors. Now, those counselors are trained not only in crisis counseling, but also specifically trained on LGBTQ identities, LGBTQ common crisis concerns. Really just makes it a lot easier to have the conversations that our LGBTQ young people are wanting to have. Now, we do primarily serve folks who are 24 and under, and who are LGBTQ. But if anyone reaches out to us, we will, of course, serve them. We just might direct them to different resources after the call is wrapping up. I also like to point out how important these services are now more than ever. Over the last couple of years, 988 had a press 3 option for LGBTQ young people, which was a really great program that served folks that didn't even know it existed. Because when you called in to 988, you'd be given the options of pressing 2 for Spanish speaking language services, or 3 for LGBTQ services, or 4 for veteran services, right? Unfortunately, the federal administration, decided to defund that program as of July of this year, which means that Trevor is now the only LGBTQ serving organization in the US for crisis services. There's also Trans Lifeline, which of course serves trans individuals, which is also a really great resource. But again, that 988 doesn't have that specific LGBTQ resource any longer. Then on the other side of our house, the second area of our work is our prevention programs. I think of our prevention work as we're trying to work ourselves out of a job. We want a world where our young people don't experience crisis to begin with. So what does that look like? Well, first we have Trevor Space. Trevor Space is a safe space social networking site for LGBTQ young people. Basically, it's a way for our young people to get online, talk with one another. They can talk about their identities if they want to, but really it's about building community, building connection, which we know is one of the strongest protective factors for LGBTQ young people. Now, we want to maintain this as a safe space. So there are some things that we put in place to maintain that safety. For example, there are age segregated spaces. Things like direct messaging. That can only happen between people who are both under 18 or both 18 to 24. There's also moderators, and our moderators are amazing. They're watching out for inappropriate content, or perhaps if someone's in crisis, getting them the help that they need in that moment as well. Trevor Space is available for folks 13 to 24 and is not just in the United States, by the way, it's globally, anywhere that it's allowed to exist, it does. So then we have our more adult-facing resources. We have research, which puts out regular evaluations and surveys about LGBTQ youth mental health, letting us know what are those risk factors, what are those protective factors, how can we best be supporting LGBTQ young people. Then we have our advocacy team, which works at local, state, and federal levels to advocate for LGBTQ people. Unfortunately, in the past several years, that's looked like pushing back against a lot of anti-LGBTQ laws, things like gender affirming care bans, bathroom bans, don't say gay bills, and more. In the last legislative cycle, so in 2024, we saw over 550 anti-LGBTQ bills introduced in the vast majority of states, including some in New York, by the way. Then we have our education team, which I might be just a little bit biased, but it's my favorite, where we seek to educate primarily youth serving adults, making sure that folks have all the tools in their back pocket to provide safe and affirming care to LGBTQ young people everywhere. All right, so why do we focus on suicide prevention amongst the LGBTQ young people population? To answer that question, we have to look at suicide as a whole in the United States. So we know suicide's preventable, but it continues to be a growing health problem. Over the last 2 decades, suicide rate has increased by about 37%. It's currently the ninth leading cause of death for folks ages 10 to 64. But that's all people. What happens when I move it to just young people? What we see there is that it's the second leading cause of death for folks 10 to 14, and the third leading cause of death for folks 15 to 24. So this is an even bigger issue for our young people. Now, in case you're wondering, what's the first leading cause of death? It is unintentional injury, accidental death. Depends, the label depends on where you're at. Um, we do a lot to prevent that first leading cause, right? We have lifeguards, we have seatbelt laws, we have campaigns to get kids to wear their helmets when riding bicycles, right? We do a lot of things to prevent that first leading cause. We could be doing just as much to prevent suicide. But once again, that's all of my young people. So what happens when I just look at LGBTQ young people? Well, there we find that they're 4 times as likely as their peers to seriously consider attempting suicide. In fact, on our most recent survey, 39% said that they had seriously considered attempting suicide in the past year. Now, that's obviously a much higher rate, first of all. But to give us a little bit of perspective, if we take that percentage, which has been pretty steady over the last decade of our research, and we take a conservative estimate of how many LGBTQ young people there are in this country, we find that more than 1.8 million LGBTQ youth seriously consider suicide each and every year in the United States alone. So a really big issue for my LGBTQ young people. Now, I say that, but I don't want us to think that LGBTQ young people are inherently prone to suicide risk because of who they are. It's not about their identity, but rather they're placed at higher risk because of the mistreatment and stigmatization that they face in society. Really important distinction. We live in a society right now where LGBTQ people are being told that they're mentally ill, that they don't belong, that they don't actually exist, that it's a choice, things like that. And so it's really important that when we're talking about mental health, that we frame it appropriately and understand that these risks are because of the societal response, not because of the person's identity. And as an example of that, 60% of LGBTQ young people reported experiencing discrimination based on their sexual orientation or their gender identity. As you might imagine, that level of discrimination, not too good for your mental health and well-being. In fact, those who did experience discrimination were twice as likely to have made a suicide attempt in the past year. than those who didn't face discrimination. And then when our young people want help, are they able to get it? And unfortunately, the vast majority, the answer is no. 84% of our LGBTQ young people said they wanted help from a mental health provider, which I think is really amazing that 84% said, yes, I'd like help. Unfortunately, of that 84%, 50% of those were unable to receive that help in the past year. Now, there's a lot of reasons why they couldn't get that help, everything from accessibility to mental health stigma to not being able to find LGBTQ competent care, right? So, a lot of reasons in there, but anything we can do to increase access to care is going to help our LGBTQ young people's mental health and well-being. Now, that's a lot of negative statistics to start out here, so I want to also pause and give us a positive moment, which is one of the things that we know from our research is when LGBTQ young people report feeling accepted by adults in their life, it lowers their odds of attempting suicide by up to 40%. And oftentimes, it only takes one affirming adult to make that entire difference. You can be that affirming adult in a young person's life because it's an adult. It didn't say a parent or teacher or a grandparent or any of that. It just says one affirming adult can make that difference. So let's be that affirming adult in some young person's life. And let's talk a little bit about allyship. So in the chat, if you'd let me know, what do you think of? What words or phrases come to mind when you hear the word allyship? All right, kindness, support, understanding, together, friends, advocate, speaking up, empathy, very important, listening, united, safe community, defender, like-minded, emotional support. So many good options here. And what I like about a lot of these is that they're actionable. And that's really important for allyship because allyship is supporting a community that's not your own. Today, we're specifically talking about the LGBTQ community, but you can apply this to any community that isn't a one that you identify with. I also like to point out that LGBTQ people that might be in the room right now, we can be an ally to our own community as well because we're not all the same, right? I, as a trans masculine person, don't experience the world the same way a trans woman does. And so I can be an ally to trans women. So it's supporting a community that's not your own, but it must be active. It requires doing the work. Now, that work includes things like educating yourself, which you're doing right now. Well done. But it could be all sorts of things. Actively listening to someone talk about their experience. Speaking up when we see harassment or discrimination happening. Actively including or celebrating LGBTQ identities. Calling our elected officials. There's so many different ways. And you don't have to do all of the work. You just got to be doing some work. And the litmus test that I like to put out for you to think about is, would the community you ally yourself with consider you to be an ally? And really think about that question. If the answer is yes, great. Keep doing whatever it is you're doing. But if it's no, or maybe, or I don't know, then consider what's one thing you could do going forward that is doing the work of allyship. And we're going to give some examples today, so don't worry. You will leave with some homework to do if you don't have ideas currently. One of the things that we can do to be a good ally is to understand some of the common language. And right now in our society, there's a lot of things said about LGBTQ people. Some of those things are true, but a lot of those things are misconceptions. And so when we don't understand the basic terminology that's being used in the community, it's really hard to then speak up and help push back against some of those misconceptions. So today I want to cover a couple of terms that will hopefully help guide those conversations going forward. So I'm going to invite you in the chat. I'm going to pop up a term on the screen. And if you think you know what that term is, go ahead and type it out in the chat. And even if you're like, I think I know what it is, but I'm not sure, and you have to put question marks behind it, that's okay. Just be bold, be brave, and make a guess. A collection of physical characteristics and personal mannerisms that society associates with a particular sex. What do you think that is? All right, seeing gender identity, gender norms, gender. Yeah, y'all are in the right track there. This one is just gender, straight up gender. Um, Gender is a societal construct. It's it's made up of all of our beliefs and opinions and thoughts collectively. And depending on what culture you grew up in, what era you grew up in, what your parents thought, what your religion thought, all those things influence gender. And gender also is fluid, it shifts and changes over time. For example, let's talk about high heels for a minute. High heels are currently considered to be a feminine trait in our society. But has that always been the case? No, right? I can look back to disco era, club kid era. Heels were for everyone. I can also look back further. Roman Empire, Napoleon, these military officials were wearing heels. Now, they weren't wearing stilettos. That would be ridiculous. But they were wearing heels. Heels oftentimes lock into stirrups easier. They make you look taller and more imposing. And so at one point, they were considered to be very masculine. Another example is the color pink. Pink used to be, in the 1800s, a masculine color, and blue was a feminine color. Now, there's a lot of color theory as to why that is, if you want to dive down that rabbit hole at some point. But that shifted and changed in the early 1900s, and all of a sudden, pink is a feminine color and blue is a masculine color. This is around the same time that things like mass media marketing is happening. So all of a sudden, we're getting messages from advertisements that tell us, oh, you had a little baby girl? Congratulations. You should dress her in pink and give her pink toys to play with. Oh, you had a little baby boy? Oh, congrats. You should dress him in blue and give him blue things and paint the nursery blue, right? Oh, you had one and then you had the other? Oh, now you have to buy all new things because you can't use the pink for the boy and the blue for the girl. That's just not okay. What a great marketing ploy. Capitalism influences gender. Now, I say that not as a bad thing, but just as a data point. I actually think it could be a good thing if we use it right. If we know gender shifts and changes, We have evidence of this. Then gender can shift and change again. And perhaps it can shift to be something more expansive, more inclusive of more people. And we can use all these tools to get us there. All right, how about this next one? Someone's innermost concept of self as masculine, feminine, a blend of both, another gender, or even set of genders, or even lack of gender. What do you think? There we go. Yeah, that one is gender identity. Very good. So we had societal gender floating around out here. And then we take a piece of that and claim it for ourselves. And that is our gender identity. Everyone has a gender identity. Just some people don't have to think about theirs as hard as others. I actually do wish that people would think about their gender identity just like a little more. Like if I could assign everyone a journaling assignment, I'd be like, write on the following 5 questions. Number one, what is my gender identity? Number two, how do I know that's my gender identity? Number three, when did I first know that was my gender identity? Number four, what parts of my gender identity am I comfortable with? And finally, number five, what parts of my gender identity am I uncomfortable with? I think if we all asked ourselves those questions, two things would happen. First, we would know ourselves a lot better. And when we know ourselves better, what other people are doing matters less, which means it doesn't matter what your identity is. It doesn't bother me and mine. Helps reduce fear, reduce the ability for power grabbing, and more. The other thing it would do, the second thing, is it would give us a little bit of empathy for trans people and the questions that they ask themselves and are asked by others. And a little empathy goes a long way. How about this one? The ways in which a person presents himself to the world through hairstyles, clothing, toys, preferences, mannerisms, etc. Very good. Gender expression. So we had societal gender floating around out here. We took and claimed a piece of that for ourselves, our gender identity. And then we put that back out into the world. And that putting it back out into the world, that is our gender expression. Now, more people do tend to think about their gender expression than their gender identity, even if it's subconscious. For example, when you got up this morning and put on some clothes, part of that choice was gender expression. Now, it might not have been the leading choice. It might have been things like comfortability or professionalism or something in that way. But gender expression was a piece. When you walk down the street, how swishy are you? That's gender expression. Now, sometimes people's gender expression and gender identity don't align. And I want to talk about a few reasons why that might be. First reason, safety. And this is one I think many people can understand. Sometimes it is unsafe to express your gender in the way that you want to in the world. Now, that's particularly true for folks like trans women of color who experience disproportionate rates of assault, violence, homicide in this country. But again, I think it's true for a lot of people. An example, Have you ever, or know anyone who has ever, decided not to wear a short skirt or high heels home because they knew they were coming home by themselves late at night? Yeah, lots of people know that, right? That's curbing our gender expression to maintain safety. We do it all the time. And so, folks who have different gender identities than what society might expect of them sometimes curb that expression in order to maintain safety. Another reason that someone's expression and identity might not align, economic reasons. I'll use myself as an example of this. When I came out as trans, I was in undergrad, I was student teaching. So, of course, student teachers work all day for free. They go to school at night. Not a lot of extra money hanging around. So it took some time and a lot of thrifting to be able to get my wardrobe to match how I identified. So economics is another piece of why identity and expression might be a little different. Safety, economics, but frankly, no one owes anyone any specific gender expression. We should all feel free to express ourselves in whatever ways makes us most comfortable. All right, how about this one? Patterns of emotional, romantic, and or sexual attraction to another person or people. Very good. Some folks in the chat. Sexual orientation. I would have also accepted sexuality. Also works. Important to recognize that sexual orientation is not just about sexual attraction. It's also about emotional and romantic attraction. Too often, the LGBTQ community is hypersexualized, and that creates a lot of negative responses in the world. And so when we recognize that sexuality and sexual orientation aren't just about sexual attraction, but they're about that emotional and romantic, it's about building families and relationships and things like that. When we recognize that, it makes it a little bit more personable, um, allows people to see the depth of these identities rather than that just surface level sexual attraction. So, all of these things that we've talked about today, I want you to think of them all as being on a spectrum. So, gender is a spectrum. Yes, we have male and female, but we also have non-binary folks in there too. And even if we're looking at sex, biological sex, that still is a spectrum. Male, female, but intersex exists in a variety of ways. Gender identity, again, am I leaning more as a woman or a man or non-binary or something outside of that altogether? Gender expression, more masculine or more feminine or more androgynous. And then sexual orientation, attracted to women, attracted to men, attracted to both or neither, right? So all of those, people can plot themselves on those spectrums all across the board. And our society tends to expect us to be in a kind of a straight line where you're born male and therefore your gender is male and your identity is a man and your expression is masculine and your sexual orientation is attracted to women. That's one path that our society expects from people. And then we could do the reverse with female, woman, feminine, attracted to men. But those expectations don't truly meet what our humanity is. And our humanity is plotted all over those different spectrums. You don't have to be in a single straight line. You can be, and that's fine if you are. But we have so much diversity amongst our people. All right. The last term for the day is an umbrella term used to describe someone who is a sexual or gender minority. This has historically been used as a slur, but has been increasingly reclaimed by LGBTQ communities. Queer, very good. Okay, so let's talk a moment about reclaimed words. There are reclaimed words in the community that are reclaimed for the community only. These are words that should only be used if you identify in that way. There are some within the LGBTQ community, and then there are some out in other communities as well. I'm sure you can think of some. If you're like, that's a word I shouldn't say, you're absolutely right, and it's for that community. Then there are words that are reclaimed, and anyone can use them as long as you're using them respectfully. Queer is one of those words. So, as long as you're using queer in a respectful manner, you're using appropriate tone, you're welcome to use this word to describe the whole community. Queer also might be used to describe an individual's identity as well. Now, because it has been historically used as a slur, we want to be mindful. And obviously, we're not going to do something like drive by someone on the side of the road and holler this out the window at them. Now, there are going to be people in the community who don't like this word, especially older generations. And if that's the case, then we just don't use the word around them. Always mirror the language a person uses when talking about their identity. It's the best way to be respectful. One other little note I want to make about this slide is about the term LGBTQ+, which is what we use at Trevor. But you might have seen it as just LGBTQ or LGBTQIA or LGBTQ with a bunch of other letters behind it. All of those are right. If you start with LGBTQ, you'll be fine. If you want to add more to be more inclusive, that's awesome. All right, let's talk about a different part of language, which are pronouns. Let's first talk about why pronouns matter. So we asked our trans and non-binary young people, what pronouns do you use? 75% said they used binary pronouns, he, him, his, or she, her, hers. But 25% said they used pronouns beyond the binary. Things like combinations of pronouns, singular use of they, them, or neopronouns. So 25% of our trans and non-binary young people are using pronouns that our society hasn't quite caught up to doing yet. This is important because when trans and non-binary young people said their pronouns were respected most or all of the time, their suicide attempt rate was half of the rate of those whose pronouns weren't respected. Half. So let's make sure we're respecting people's pronouns and creating that safe and affirming environment where people can live and thrive. So you might remember that pronouns come in a variety of different forms, but I want you to start thinking about these as like sets of pronouns. So like she, her, hers, herself. It's one set, and so forth on down the line. we're used to using she, her, hers, herself, he, him, his, himself. Those are pretty simple. The key there is using the pronouns that the person asks for, which if we're talking about trans people, it's probably opposite of what they were assigned at birth. However, there are other pronouns we can use too for individuals. We can use a singular they, them, theirs. Now, we do this all the time, and we don't even realize that we do it for individuals. So, an example, if folks were all in a room together and we get up to leave, there's a phone on the table. Someone might holler out, "Hey, someone left their phone." I hope they come back for it. Now, in using they, we don't expect that phone belongs to more than one person. We just know that it's a person whose gender identity we don't know. We use they in the same way in a singular as we do a plural. So they are speaking, not they is speaking. Um, and again, we use context to tell us that it's one person. Now, in addition to a singular they, we also have neopronouns. Neo means new. And these are pronouns that we have created to fulfill a need in the English language of not having a singular gender neutral personal pronoun. We have a single gender neutral pronoun, it. We don't use it for people. So instead, our community said, let's create some pronouns. So there are many different sets of neopronouns. Two of the common ones that we see are Z, here, here's, herself, and Z, zir, zir's, zirself. The way that I use that, Z is speaking. I listen to hear. The backpack is here's. Or the backpack is zir's. If you are given neopronouns and you're like, I don't know how to use that in a sentence correctly, that's okay. Just ask the person. Be respectful, of course, but you can say, hey, I don't know how to use that in a sentence correctly. Could you give me a few example sentences so I can get it right? And hopefully that person will give you a few sentences. I suggest writing them down and then practicing them. Practicing someone's pronouns is an act of allyship. People are going to choose what pronouns work best for them. That may or may not align with any particular identity or expression, and that's okay. People might use any or all pronouns, which literally means you can't get it wrong. People might use more than one set of pronouns, so they might say, I use they, she pronouns. If that's the case, you can use they, them, theirs, or she, her, hers. As long as you're using an option that someone gave you, you're good to go. Some people might not use any pronouns at all. If that's the case, we just use their name over and over again. If you mess up someone's pronouns, apologize and move on. And what I mean by that is we don't want to make this like big, huge deal about it and make the trans person say it's okay, because it's not okay. So if I'm going like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, I messed up your pronouns, and like, oh, it's just so hard. I've always known you as this, and I'm trying, and if you keep going, right? Oof. Instead, say something to the effect of, I'm sorry I messed up your pronouns earlier. I know you use he, him pronouns. I'm going to do that better going forward. By saying it in that way, we've apologized. We've also made sure we know what their correct pronouns are. And we've said we're going to do better. So now it's our job to do better. Finally, on pronouns, if there's someone's pronouns who you're struggling with, you're like, oof, I've known them for 20 years of their life and they just changed their name and pronouns and I keep messing it up. That's okay. You can practice. So set an alarm on your phone to go off once a day at a time convenient to you. And when that alarm goes off, I want you to practice saying out loud their correct pronouns by saying 3 positive affirmations about them while using those correct pronouns. Now, what are we doing by doing that? I'm so sorry, I have something in my eye. Um, what we're doing is we are we're practicing, right? 3 times a day, we're saying it out loud, which means we're building new neural pathways. And those neural pathways are being strengthened by the boost of serotonin we're sending it by saying positive affirmations. And we also know from psychology that if you say nice things about people when they're not around, you tend to be nicer to them when they are around. So while you're working on getting those pronouns right, you'll be nicer to that trans person. And every trans person could use a little bit more niceness in their life, I promise. So again, you do that each day, every day, 3 positive affirmations using the correct pronouns until you get it right every single time. So other language considerations that we want to keep in mind, gender neutral language. Gender neutral language is a really great way to address people if we don't know what their gender is a great way to address groups so we're inclusive of all people. And it's also a really good stopgap measure if there's any disagreement about gender. So this slide was shared with me by a first grade teacher. Mileage with Peepadoodles may vary. That said, there are many different ways we can address a group of people in a gender neutral way. So instead of ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, we can say things like team, friends, folks, y'all. If you want to be formal, esteemed colleagues and guests. All of these things are more inclusive. They can also help reinforce roles too. I'm a former high school teacher. I taught math. So my students were all mathematicians. So when we were about to do a new problem, I'd be like, all right, mathematicians, our next problem. It reinforced the idea that they're all mathematicians while keeping it in a gender neutral way that addressed everyone in the class. So you can find what works best for you, but anywhere where we can insert gender neutral language is going to be a benefit. Additionally, I said earlier, it can help discrepancies. So when I was working with my students, if I had a student who was trans, but their family was like, oh, heck no, I could use gender neutral language like your child, my student. Those things were accurate, but I wasn't misgendering the child, nor was I causing an argument with the parent. The other part of language that I want to highlight is names. Sometimes people change their names to better reflect their identity. It's really hard to change your legal name in a lot of places. It takes court documents and court filing fees. And then even once you change your name legally, you have to change it in all these other places. And each time you end up having to submit that court document along with other paperwork, it's a hassle. So we always want to call people by the name that they use, period. That goes for trans and non-trans people alike, by the way. Um, if you don't need to know their legal name, then you don't need to know their legal name. There are valid reasons for needing to know that, but let them know why if you do need to know it. So, like, I'm about to fill out this Social Security paperwork for you. I need to know your legal name. Or I'm about to write this IEP and it has to be in your legal name, right? Tell them why. It helps reduce anxiety because by addressing that kind of elephant in the room, we're saying, I understand this is your legal name. I also understand this is not what you go by. And I'm going to continue calling you by the name you've chosen for yourself. I'm just going to write your legal name on the papers over here. One little note about the term preferred as well. A lot of times people will say, what's your preferred pronouns? What's your preferred name? We don't use that anymore because preferred makes it sound like there's a choice. And it's not a choice. Like I prefer chocolate chip cookie dough ice cream, but I'll eat whatever ice cream you give me. I don't prefer the name Keegan or the pronouns they, them. I use those things. It's not a choice. So just ask people, what are your pronouns? What name do you go by? Things like that can make a big difference. Some final thoughts on language. We always want to mirror the language a person uses when talking about their identity. Um, Mirroring language is a really great way of not offending people and again, using the words that they use for themselves. And then if you aren't sure of an identity that someone has shared with you, or if it's an identity that has different meanings, you can use the affirming exploration technique to learn more. So thanks for sharing that with me. You know, a lot of people use the term pansexual in different ways. So when you say you identify as pansexual, can you tell me what that means for you? Even if I've never heard the word before, I didn't say that. I just said, oh, tell me what that means for you. I'm going to learn a little bit more without othering or non-normalizing the experience. By the way, this technique is good for more than just LGBTQ identities. It's helpful for things like religion or different cultural identities and things like that. So it can be a useful tool across the board. All right, let's talk a little bit about coming out. So, coming out is the process in which someone shares their identity, whether that's their sexual orientation or gender identity, with themselves and others. If someone comes out to you, a couple of important things to remember. One, this is them trusting you with some private information, right? So, thank them for sharing that. Two, they're probably asking, telling you for a reason, whether that's they just want everyone to know or they want some support of some kind. So ask them what you can do to help, right? And then the other part is that the last part is keep this information to yourself. We don't share that out with other people, even if we think it's obvious, even if we think other people know. Unless this person has told us for certain that someone else knows, we don't share that information. Um, because outing people can be dangerous. It can cause rejection, it can cause loss of employment, loss of housing, all sorts of other things. Um, Especially with our young people who rely on the adults around them to support them, it can be particularly detrimental. Um, if someone isn't out to everyone, we want to support them. So we want to ask them a few questions about that. You know, thanks for sharing that with me. How can I support you? Or I want to check in with you. Are there people that you're not out to? Or if we're talking about identities and someone says, hey, I want you to use this new name and these pronouns for me, I might want to ask, hey, I'm happy to use those names and pronouns for you, but should I do that around other students? Should I do that around your parents? Should I do that with your colleagues, right? Wherever you're interacting with them, you want to ask about those spaces because we want to be respectful. We want to use their appropriate name and pronouns, but we don't want to accidentally out someone by doing that. And that might mean that we end up using two different names and two different sets of pronouns for them in different spaces, which can be a challenge, but it's super important to being supportive and not outing someone at the same time. All right. Just a little note on intersectionality. Today we've talked a lot about LGBTQ identities, but LGBTQ people aren't a monolith. We're not all the same. And so it's important to recognize that people are bringing with them different levels of um, privilege and oppression based on their other identities. And so the experience of a white gay man is not the same as a black gay man. The experience of a Christian trans woman is not the same as a um, Muslim trans woman, right? Not all the same. And that's really important because we have to recognize that minority stress exists and that causes different levels of um, mental health concerns, including suicidality, as a result from that stigma, discrimination, and rejection. And those who occupy multiple marginalized social positions are more likely to experience that stress from different areas of their life, not just that one identity that they hold. And so we need to do anything we can to help reduce that stress, reduce the bias in our society, make sure protective factors are put in place so that people have the support systems that they need. I skipped ahead too far. Okay. Just a reminder, allyship is actionable and it is consistent. It is constantly doing the work in small ways, in big ways, any way that we can show up. So some final reminders of actionable allyship: exercise empathy. It is the best form of communication. Check your own biases and demonstrate respect. You don't have to agree with someone or understand someone to respect them. Use inclusive language, mirror the language that folks use for themselves. Be intentional and thoughtful about what you ask and say. I get to educate people on my identity and I get paid for that. A lot of people aren't compensated fairly for the emotional labor that goes into talking about one's identities. So be mindful that if you're asking someone to share about their identity, you need to give them both space to either share and actively listen to them, or for them to say, you know what, I don't feel like sharing. And make it so that either of those responses are equally okay. Facilitate inclusive pronoun practices, not only using people's pronouns correctly and consistently, but also share your pronouns. Here on Zoom, for example, you could scroll over your little box, and up in the upper right-hand corner of that box, there's a three-dot uh, marking, and you can click that and give the option of rename. And you could put your pronouns in parentheses behind your name. It's a great way to signal, I know what pronouns are. I'm going to listen to what yours are and respect them. It also normalizes the behavior, so that way it's not just the trans person that has their pronouns on there um, behind their name. You can also share your pronouns anytime you introduce yourself. Again, the more we normalize that, the easier it becomes for trans and non-binary folks. Speak out against harassment, discrimination, biases, microaggressions. Be an upstander, not a bystander. Advocate where you can for gender inclusive facilities, whether that's bathrooms, changing rooms, inpatient care spaces. A single stall gender neutral bathroom literally helps everyone. So if you can advocate for that, that's great. But honestly, just making people feel comfortable using whatever bathroom best aligns to their identity is fine. Encourage and facilitate self-advocacy. Self-advocacy is a form of resiliency. That means amplifying LGBTQ voices, fostering connections, promoting positive media representation. Any of that will be helpful. Continue educating yourself on LGBTQ identities, on mental health resources, know what those are before you need them. And finally, advocate for change, whether that's in your own company or organization, or whether through state and federal legislation. All of those things are helpful. We need more allies doing that work. Where can you learn more? Check out our friends at Out and Equal and Human Rights Campaign if you're interested in LGBTQ inclusion in the workplace. If you're more interested in LGBTQ mental health and well-being of young people, you can check out the trevorproject.org/research. That will get you to our national survey, our 50 state report, our monthly research briefs. our longitudinal report, and more. Ah, yeah, Precious just dropped the longitudinal study, which is amazing. And then trevorproject.org/resources are a great way to find support for LGBTQ young people and their allies. And finally, let me be a resource to you. That is my email, keegan.miller@thetrevorproject.org. We bring this training as well as our suicide prevention training into the communities, whether that's with businesses, nonprofits, government agencies, you name it, we've probably trained them. So feel free to reach out if you ever want to bring a training to someplace near you. And with that, I'll leave this feedback up. I know we're past time. Thank you for sticking around. But if you do have any questions, I'm happy to answer those. So go ahead and drop those in the chat if you have them. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Keegan. And yes, and I'll make sure to provide the slides with additional resources. Thank you to Precious for managing the chat and for including additional resources. Thank you to Audrey and Julie for signing for us today. Again, this presentation and how we can be actionable allies is so important to the work that we do every day in terms of the culture we want to create here at OCFS, in terms of the programs and services we are connected to, and obviously how we want to show up as citizens and leaning into being inclusive and supportive and affirming of all individuals. So again, I thank all of you for participating. Keegan, thank you for this presentation. And we hope to work with the Trevor Project in the future.
Absolutely.
I hope everyone has a great day. Thank you.